You cannot see the whole supply chain that your company depends on. A partner that already holds a key is the shortest path to the systems you treat as crown jewels. Those crown jewels are the customer records, the payroll files, the identity store, and the source code that would hurt the business if they left the building. The review that signed the vendor last year does not watch that path today. The vendor review can miss the breach because the people who buy from a vendor and the people who defend the network grew up in different rooms. The paperwork can look complete while the path stays open. A supply chain is the set of outside parts, people, and services that a company needs before it can deliver its own product. In a factory, that chain is steel, chips, and boxes that arrive at a dock. In software, that chain is the payroll system in the cloud, the identity tool that logs people in, the library a developer pulled from the internet, and the support firm that can reset an account. If a link in that chain fails, the product the company ships is already damaged, even when the company's own code did not change. Factories learned quality control a long time ago. Incoming parts get measured before they enter the line, because a bad bolt becomes a bad machine. Software did not inherit that habit at the same speed. A third party can ship a feature, a patch, or a login screen into production without anyone measuring the access it gained. Quality control for parts asks whether the part is sound. Quality control for software has to ask whether the vendor can reach data, identity, or the build, and what happens when that vendor is wrong. Third-party risk management is the discipline that finds and constrains the risk that arrives through vendors, partners, and service providers. TPRM does not erase risk. No program can erase risk, because a company that uses other companies will always import some of their failures. TPRM constrains that imported risk to the level the business can tolerate. The work is not only a security checklist. Financial health, operational stability, cybersecurity, and reputation sit in the same ledger, because a vendor that is solvent and still sloppy with admin keys can ruin a quarter. The question is not whether a partner is pleasant. The question is whether the damage they can cause still fits inside the board's appetite. The gap exists because TPRM and cybersecurity grew on separate paths. Cybersecurity grew as a defensive craft that answered malware, stolen passwords, and network intrusion inside the company's own walls. Vendor review grew as a procurement craft that asked whether a supplier could stay solvent and keep the lights on. Those two crafts did not share a classroom, a budget, or a definition of done. The industry is still paying for that split, because the vendor now sits inside the wall that security was trained to guard. In a large organization, procurement wants a lower bill. Legal wants a written contract that can be defended in court. Cybersecurity wants a smaller attack surface, which is the set of doors an attacker can try. None of those goals is wrong. They become a blind spot when they compete. A vendor that wins on price and signs a thick written contract can still hold a key that security never measured. The organization then treats the vendor as reviewed, while the path into the crown jewels stays unwatched. Cybersecurity risk is the first type. Confidentiality means the wrong person cannot read the data. Integrity means the wrong person cannot change the data. Availability means the service is there when the business needs it. Those three words are the CIA triad, and a vendor can break any one of them. A cloud application with weak login rules can leak customer files. A managed service provider is a company you hire to run systems for you, and if that provider holds broad admin rights, an attacker who enters the provider can launch ransomware inside your network. The data and the outage are yours. Operational risk is the second type. It appears when a vendor's systems, people, or process fail, and the business cannot do its work. A cloud region can go dark. A vendor can ship a bad update. A recovery plan can exist on paper and fail the first time someone tries it. No attacker is required. The CrowdStrike sensor update in 2024 is the public example. A flawed update knocked large numbers of Windows machines into a crash screen. Public reporting treated it as an outage, not as an intrusion. The business stops on your side of the written contract. Compliance risk is the third type. It appears when a third party breaks a law or a rule while holding data on your behalf. A payroll processor that mishandles employee records can trip GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation. A healthcare vendor that mishandles patient records can trip HIPAA, which is the United States Health Privacy Rule. Regulators treat the organization that collected the data as the party that must answer. The regulator finds the collector. Reputational risk is the fourth type. Customers, regulators, and partners lose trust because a third party failed, and they do not split the blame. A marketing platform that leaks a customer list still shows your logo on the apology. A contractor that posts personal data still shows your name in the headline. People outside the building do not hold a map of your subcontractors. They hold the brand they paid. The headline carries your logo. Fourth-party risk is the fifth type. A fourth party is a vendor's vendor. Your supplier may depend on a subcontractor, an open-source library, or a cloud you never reviewed. Open source means software published for anyone to use, often without a written sales contract. If that hidden dependency fails, you may learn about it only after the outage or the leak. The data that left the fourth party was still your data. Those 5 types sit on one table because they travel together. Cybersecurity risk, operational risk, compliance risk, reputational risk, and fourth-party risk are not 5 separate programs. A single vendor outage can trip all 5 in the same week. The organization owns the impact in every row, which is why TPRM has to hold financial, operational, cyber, and reputation in one ledger instead of 5 inboxes. A solvency score would have greenlit the support laptop, the signed update, and the forgotten bucket. Those 5 types only count if the review can see a key, not only a balance sheet. TPRM did not start as a cyber desk. Early vendor review asked about money and operations. Procurement and audit wanted to stop a bad deal, a fraud, or a supplier that could not deliver. Risk equaled dollars, not data. Hardware quality control came first, because swapping a bad board is expensive. The same logic reached software late. By the time the questionnaire arrived, the software vendor was already sitting inside the architecture. Today, vendors sit inside the architecture. Human resources runs in a cloud application. Finance runs in a cloud application. Operations talk to each other through application programming interfaces, which are machine-to-machine doorways. Teams now plug in artificial intelligence services that read tickets and repositories. Governance still looks like a fax-era checklist. The form asks whether the company is solvent and whether someone signed a policy. The form does not ask whether this vendor can hurt us by accident. Due diligence is the homework you do before you trust a vendor. Classic due diligence asks whether the supplier can pay its bills and keep a schedule. The harder question is whether the supplier can damage you without meaning to. The CrowdStrike update in 2024 answers that question in public. Millions of Windows machines hit a crash screen after a sensor update that contained a defect. There was no attacker in that story. There was still a global stoppage. A review that only asks about solvency will miss that class of harm every time. Vendors became the target because the castle is hard and the supplier is soft. Breaking a well-defended enterprise takes time and skill. Breaking a smaller supplier that already connects to that enterprise takes less of both. The supplier is trusted, overlooked, and often thinner on staff. Attackers learned that the side door is cheaper than the front gate. That is why a hardened network can still fail through a partner that nobody treated as part of the wall. 3 accelerators made that side door wider. Cloud adoption scattered sensitive data across providers in many countries. Business processes then stitched themselves together through software as a service, application programming interfaces, shared identity, managed service providers, build pipelines, open source packages, and now artificial intelligence plugins. Attackers industrialized supply chain attacks, which means they treat one vendor compromise as a way to reach many customers at once. An annual questionnaire is not a defense against that pattern. A form that is 12 months old cannot see a key that was issued last Tuesday. The first public case is a privileged support path. In 2022, public reporting from the United States Cyber Safety Review Board and from CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, described how the group known as LapSUS reached a workstation at Cytel. Cytel was a third-party customer support provider for Okta. Support work needs a window into identity tools, because that is how a help desk resets a lockout. The access path was legitimate. Privilege that a vendor holds must sit inside identity and access management, which is the system that grants, reviews, and revokes keys. If the key is only in a folder for the written contract, it is not managed. The second public case is a poisoned update. In the SolarWinds Sunburst campaign, malware was placed into the vendor's software build and update path. Customers treated the SolarWinds update as trusted software, so the update became the distribution channel. Public fact sheets from CISA describe impact across governments and a large number of companies. That pattern is why the United States issued Executive Order 14028, and why NIST published 800-218, the Secure Software Development Framework. Those documents exist because a trusted update is a delivery route. The third public case is a forgotten contractor. In 2017, Deep Root Analytics, a data firm hired for operational support by the Republican National Committee, stored more than a terabyte of voter files in an Amazon S3 bucket that was open to anyone who had the address. Public reporting, including NPR, described the exposure. The project was easy to file as small, short-term, or not an information technology purchase. The dump was still regulated data. Size of the purchase order is not size of the blast. 3 industries produced one structure, and that structure is how a vendor failure becomes your breach. Those 3 stories do not share an industry. They share a structure. Access was not held to the minimum the work required. Oversight had gaps, so a support laptop, a build server, or a storage bucket sat outside the review. Security expectations were vague, so nobody could fail a vendor against a clear rule. The relationship grew past what the business still remembered, which is common with long-running support and outsourcing deals. If you can name those 4 traits, you can recognize the next incident before it has a logo. Zero trust is the name for the first of those traits done correctly. Zero trust means we do not grant lasting trust because a vendor is on a list or inside a network. Every session, every admin tool, and every support login must prove the need, and the grant must stay as small as the task. The support path in the Oktay case was legitimate, and that is exactly why it needed the same identity controls as an internal admin. A legitimate path that is not minimum is still a path. The real problem is not that vendors get breached. Every organization gets breached if you wait long enough. The problem is that the breach becomes yours because oversight and cybersecurity were not aligned. The vendor's laptop becomes your incident channel. The vendor's update becomes your malware path. The vendor's open bucket becomes your regulatory event. Alignment would have put the key in identity, the update in a verified pipeline, and the bucket in a review that does not care how small the written contract was. The 4 traits persist when each room can post a win and the finding still has no owner. A silo is a team that optimizes its own score and does not share a win with the next team. The vendor then optimizes the metric of whoever leads the deal. If the buy leads, the vendor cuts cost. If the clause leads, the vendor signs a transfer. If uptime leads, the vendor delays a painful patch. None of those scores is the path. When those rooms do not agree, the outcomes are predictable. Security clauses go missing from the written contract. Access is granted far beyond the task. 4th parties stay undocumented. Patches follow convenience instead of risk. Breach notice takes days when the business needed hours. Those 5 outcomes are not random defects. They are what a split scoreboard produces. What good looks like was never agreed. The business thinks it bought encryption because the written contract said the word encryption. Security later finds that the vendor meant something else, or never had to prove the setting. Compliance trusts a high-level audit. A high-level audit reviews policies, certificates, and self-written control stories. It can confirm that a process exists on paper. It often does not prove that privileged access is monitored, that logs are usable, that recovery tests restore a service, or that a serious finding is fixed on time. Procurement is paid to move. A business unit wants a new cloud tool, and the clock starts. Security is paid to question assumptions and to slow a deal that can become a catastrophe. When there are no intake criteria, security arrives as a fire drill. Intake is the front door of vendor review. Intake criteria are the facts you collect before the deal is allowed to run: data class, access type, and how the vendor sits in the architecture. A mature path uses risk-based intake. Low-risk vendors move fast on a light path, because friction that is not earned becomes a workaround. High-risk vendors trip a deeper review when clear triggers fire. Those triggers are regulated data, production access, privileged identity, code execution, artificial intelligence on sensitive repositories, a role in critical operations, or a 4th-party concentration where many of your vendors share one hidden platform. The point is not to slow every purchase. The point is to put the hard questions where the blast radius is large. Legal and cyber collide on language that sounds strong and means nothing. Industry standard controls and reasonable protection are the 2 famous phrases. They comfort a reader. They do not tell an engineer which login rule, which network split, or which log must exist. Cybersecurity thinks in controls and attack paths. Legal thinks in clauses that a court can read. If those 2 rooms do not translate, the vendor signs a sentence it cannot implement, and the company holds a clause it cannot test. Evidence-based assessment is the translation. It prefers real artifacts over self-declared sentences. The artifacts are architecture diagrams, independent audit reports, test results, and logs that an investigator can actually use. Trust but verify is the rule. A written contract without evidence is a paper shield after the breach. It may help a lawyer argue. It does not stop the first stolen session, and it does not rebuild the first missing log. Shadow buying, which is buying tools without a front door, is what happens when every team becomes a tiny procurement desk. People put software as a service on a corporate card. Developers drop open source into production. Business teams point artificial intelligence tools at tickets and document stores. Technical debt is the pile of design, security, and operational shortcuts that the company will have to repay later through a rewrite, a tighter control, or an incident. The debt is not only old code. The debt is also a tool nobody registered, with a key nobody rotates. Ownership then splits across 6 desks. Procurement owns the buy. Security owns the risk inside the tool. Compliance owns the evidence folder. Finance owns the budget. Legal owns the rights and duties. The business unit owns the usage. Nobody owns remediation, which is the work of closing the finding. A supply chain with no executive owner is a latent incident. Latent means the failure condition is already present and is waiting for the wrong week. A split scoreboard still bills the business. The real costs arrive before the headline. A vendor chosen without intake creates rework churn. Security repeats the assessment. Legal rewrites the terms. Procurement reopens price. The business sees delay and blames security. The delay was baked in when the vendor entered without a front door. A later incident then pins the response team to a long investigation with a vendor that cannot do forensics. Forensics is the disciplined reconstruction of who touched what and when. When regulated data leaves through a vendor, regulators do not care that the vendor was the root. They care whether the organization exercised due diligence. Fines, mandated audits, and corrective plans follow the name that collected the data. Treat vendors as extensions of your systems. A weakness you would not accept on an internal admin should not be acceptable on a vendor admin. The cost of that standard is paid in intake and evidence. The cost of skipping it is paid in a quarter you do not get back. The mindset trap is a folder that looks finished. An addendum is signed. A questionnaire is on file. A certificate is held. An annual review is stamped. Each artifact is useful, and none of them is a control. Weak controls in strong documentation still fail under pressure. The folder comforts the audit. The attacker does not read the folder. Open source is supply chain risk, even when there is no written contract and no vendor manager. A package can be abandoned, vulnerable, or quietly swapped. Mature programs connect TPRM to software composition analysis, which is the inventory of what is inside the build, and to a software bill of materials. A software bill of materials is a list of the components in a product, the way a food label lists ingredients. Approved repositories, provenance checks, and vulnerability management have to sit next to the vendor folder. An outage without a breach still stops the business. Payments stall. Portals go dark. A plant stops. A clinic cannot chart. The CrowdStrike event in 2024 belongs here a second time, because the lesson is operational, not only accidental. Trusting a vendor to do the right thing is not a continuity plan. If one update can halt a continent of laptops, the dependency is a business dependency, and TPRM has to score it that way even when no data left the building. Attackers do not care which committee owns the vendor. They use 4 paths. The first path is inherited vendor privilege. Unmonitored admin accounts and broad application programming interface tokens, which are machine passwords, become the attacker's accounts the moment the vendor is entered. The second path is a poisoned vendor system. Updates, binaries, configuration files, and containers can carry a change the customer will install because the source looks trusted. The third path is slow detection and delayed notice. The fourth path is fourth-party blindness. When a subcontractor or embedded library fails while your review still names only the company on the invoice. Those 4 paths stay open when a checklist is treated as a locked gate. Compliance theater is the feeling of safety that a checklist creates. A completed form looks like order. Order is not the same as a closed path. Compliance is the floor. It is the minimum evidence a regulator or a customer already expects. It is not the ceiling of the program. Frameworks capture a point in time, which means they photograph a Tuesday. They do not watch continuous exposure. which is the way access, code, and subcontractors change after that Tuesday. A program that treats the photograph as the weather will celebrate the wrong victories. The wrong victories are easy to count. Questionnaire volume, signed addenda, umptutted certificates, annual timestamps. Those numbers prove that a process exists. Risk management has to prove that the process works. A stack of forms can grow while an admin token stays unmonitored. Compliance is necessary. It is not sufficient. Attestation is a vendor's self-report about a control or a process. It is useful. It is not evidence. High-risk vendors must attach artifacts that an outsider can read. 24/7 monitoring can mean one engineer with a phone. An annual penetration test can mean a report whose findings never close. Without a definition and a proof, TPRM is forced to trust a sentence that may be incomplete, stale, or kinder than the system. A point-in-time review freezes a vendor on the day of the meeting. Vendors do not freeze. They ship features, hire people, add subcontractors, and change architecture. Access should collapse to the minimum when status changes. A person who leaves, a project that ends, or a vendor that loses a role should lose the key the same day, and the next grant should be rebuilt from need, not from habit. Attackers do not pause for the annual calendar. The review that only runs in the anniversary month is a photograph of a moving object. Metrics can lie when they count motion instead of exposure. The number of questionnaires completed does not tell a board whether a high-risk vendor admin uses multi-factor authentication, which is a second proof beyond a password. The number of generic risk scores does not tell a board how many critical vendors have never tested recovery. The count of assessments does not tell a board the age of open high findings. A cafeteria vendor and a human resources cloud application are not the same criticality. The human resources tool holds employee data and joins identity. The cafeteria vendor does not usually hold the same blast radius. Security frameworks assume hostiles. They are written as if someone is trying to enter. Vendor compliance work often does not simulate an attack path, stolen credentials, or a poisoned update. SOC 2 is a system and organization controls report. An independent auditor tests a selected set of controls over a period and writes a report. That report is one piece. It is not a network map. When TPRM runs as a compliance desk, security inherits risk it never signed. Resilience questions put the dependency back in operational language. If the vendor fails, how fast do we recover? If the vendor is breached, how far can the attacker go? If the vendor vanishes tomorrow, what is the continuity plan? Those three questions are not extra paperwork. They are the business asking whether a partner is a single point of failure. Cybersecurity and TPRM were always meant to share that ask. One craft tracks the adversary. The other craft tracks the dependency. The modern supply chain is the overlap. Regulators have already moved the line. The United States issued Executive Order 14028. Europe issued the Digital Operational Resilience Act, spoken as DORA. NIST published 800-218, the Secure Software Development Framework, and updated NIST supply chain guidance. Those rules all point at the same duty. The organization is responsible for vendor impact, not for a stack of paperwork. DORA is the European Union rule that tells financial firms to manage information and communication technology risk, including the risk that arrives through ICT third parties. But paperwork still matters as evidence. It is not the duty. Intake still starts in procurement. Evidence still dies in a folder. Ownership still has no name. That is why the operating model has to change. The first operating model fix is to front-load security into intake. The moment a business unit starts a vendor search, cybersecurity is already in the room. Early presence does three jobs. Sensitive workflows get the right depth of review on day one. Architecture has to be told in diagrams, not in marketing. Privileged paths, cross-region data flows, and hidden dependencies are harder to minimize when the people who can read a diagram are present. This does not slow every deal. It removes the fire drill that slows the deal later. The second fix is to move from documents to evidence. Evidence is measurable. A useful example is a service level on closing a critical finding, which is a clock the vendor must meet when a serious hole is found. Certifications can sit beside that clock. They cannot replace it. Vendors are rarely trying to deceive. They often treat a certificate as a substitute for a control. When TPRM pays in artifacts, risk stops being a story and starts being a number a dashboard can hold. The third fix is continuous visibility instead of an annual ritual. Continuous monitoring means ongoing sight of a vendor's posture, including vulnerabilities, leaked credentials, architecture changes, clauses in the written contract that require notice of change, and new fourth parties. Critical vendors also need a monthly or quarterly conversation that is not a replay of last year's form. A supply chain changes when a vendor adds a feature, hires a subcontractor, or merges. Control that cannot see that change is control of a photograph. The fourth fix is one executive owner plus risk tiering. Risk tiering is the ongoing ranking of vendors into high, medium, and low based on data sensitivity, access, and business dependency. Good tiering prevents two failures at once. It stops the team from giving every cafeteria the same questionnaire as payroll. It also stops a quiet identity vendor from hiding in the low pile. The executive owner holds intake, tiering, lifecycle, and the argument between rooms. Without that owner, TPRM becomes a political orphan, and each room fights for its own score. The fifth fix is to treat trust as the outcome of verification, not the substitute for it. Long relationships used to mint trust by habit. Attackers already treat the vendor as part of the target, and they study which supplier holds the key. The company has to do the same study. Verification changes the terms of the written contract, evidence expectations, escalation paths, architecture reviews, and monitoring. The vendor is an extension of the internal environment. Goodwill is welcome. Goodwill is not a control. Those 5 fixes are one operating model. Front-load security into intake. Trade documents for evidence. Keep continuous visibility. Name one executive owner and apply risk tiering. Treat trust as what verification produces. Each fix closes a gap the cases already showed. Intake would have caught the forgotten contractor. Evidence would have tested the support path. Continuous visibility would have watched the update channel. An owner would have ended the silo scoreboard. Verification would have refused a key that sat on habit. 5 risk types travel together: cybersecurity, operational, compliance, reputational, and fourth party. The shared DNA is access that was not minimum, oversight with gaps, vague security expectations, and a relationship that grew past memory. The 5 fixes are early intake, evidence instead of documents, continuous visibility, one owner with risk tiering, and verification as the source of trust. The laptop, the update, and the bucket become your event when the key is filed with the written contract. Thank you.